Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. 10 years ago, a guy named Forrest Fenn hid a treasure chest worth at least $2 million somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. Over 250,000 people searched for it in vain. We recorded this episode with Dale Neitzel about 2 weeks ago, where we talked about this unfound treasure, and we discussed the poem that is associated with it, etc. Right before I published it, Forrest Fenn just announced yesterday that the treasure had been found. We know very little details about it, so this episode is composed of two parts. The first part was recorded about 2 weeks ago before we knew the treasure was found, and the last part, which is about 10% of the whole podcast, Dale Neitzel's reflections on the announcement that the treasure has been found. Enjoy this fascinating episode. Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I have Dale Neitzel. How are you, Dale?
I'm pretty darn good, for a Friday morning. How are you?
That's right. We're up early today, 6:30 in the morning to do this. But it's also one of the most exciting podcasts I've had this year for sure. I am so thrilled to talk with you. You're an expert about finding treasure. And in this case, it's Forrest Fenn's treasure. Now, a lot of my listeners may not have heard about this, so give us the quick rundown about what Forrest Fenn's treasure is all about.
Okay, but one correction. I heard you say I'm an expert at finding treasure. I think I'm an expert at looking for treasure. I'm not so sure about the finding part. Forrest Fenn presently lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was a retired Air Force pilot, flew in Vietnam, got shot down twice. And when he got out of the military, he started a gallery in Santa Fe. And arguably, it was one of the most successful galleries ever in Santa Fe. And if you know anything about Santa Fe, that's up there because Santa Fe is really a place, a home for expensive and high-end galleries in the United States.
I remember a simple fact that it's number 3 in the art world. New York, I think, is number 1. Number 2, I think, is L.A. And number 3 is Santa Fe in the United States.
Yeah, it's a fun place to visit if you just like browsing. I mean, if you've got money, it's also fun. But even if you don't have a lot of money, it's a fun place to just cruise up and down on Canyon Street. And so Forrest was very successful. And when he was also a trader, he traded for Western Indian artifacts, things like arrowheads. He also went looking for those things, pottery, arrowheads. He ended up buying his own pueblo south of Santa Fe, and began doing his own archaeological digs there. Wrote a book about it. He's also an author. He's written, I don't remember the exact number, something like 7 or 8 books, most of them about art. People from all over the world came to Forrest's gallery. Jacqueline Kennedy came there and stayed in his guest house. He sold to many very high-end paintings to many celebrities who visited him. He got out of the business in 1988, and he sold it and built himself a house. He was living in the gallery, he and his wife and 2 children. And they built a house in Santa Fe. And Forrest, in 1988, came down with cancer and was told he just had a few months to live. And that changed how he decided to live. He really did believe this was going to be the end of him. So one of his friends was over visiting and asked him as he looked around Forrest's house, "What are you going to do with all this stuff that you've collected? You can't take it with you." And Forrest said, "Well, the heck I can't." And so he devised this plan. And his plan was to go hide a box full of some of his favorite and most precious things. This would have been a small box. And he wrote a poem. The poem had directions to finding the chest. It was a puzzle poem. It wasn't direct, go to here, go to there. It was sort of, but the directions were kind of puzzle
We'll read the poem during the podcast so that people can just hear it because it's not that long. And
what we have today is a different poem than the one he originally wrote. Yes, because Forrest intended to die at this place. He was going to commit suicide in this place. He was going to take a lot of sleeping pills. So this was his favorite place in the world. He was going to take his treasure with him. He was going to end his life there. And the last few lines of the poem said something to the effect of, take the treasure and go, but leave my bones alone. So it had a macabre twist to it in the very beginning. And that was the beginning. And then, unfortunately, as Forrest says, everything got changed because he didn't die. So
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. You make good plans, and then, so Forrest, when he recovered from the cancer, when it went into remission, I guess folks say, I guess you never recover from cancer. But when it went into remission, he changed the poem around a little bit so that you weren't looking for his bones. Still the same place, and he hid the treasure by itself, and he released the poem. And people have been looking for it. So that was in the fall of 2010 when he released the poem. He put it up on his website.
And Dale, the estimate of the treasure's worth has varied anywhere from 1 to 5 million. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and it hasn't gotten any closer in terms of anybody refining it. It does seem that every time somebody writes about it, it gets to be a little higher.
Exactly. And now it's 20 million. Do I hear 30? Yeah, but realistically, it's somewhere between 1 and there's all sorts of jewels, gems, and ingots and dollar coins that are made out of gold, blah blah blah, and also. The story of his life, an autobiography written in such tiny little letters that you need a magnifying glass to read it, and all sorts of other goodies. And some of those, a lot of the gold and the jewelry that's in there is historical in nature, so it's worth more than it would be if it was, say, a raw diamond or if it was brand new gold. It's minted into old coins, pieces of 8, and things like that, which make them much more valuable than the raw price of gold. Right. Now, he wrote this book. It's called The Thrill of the Chase, which you can get, and in the book, that's where he puts the poem in, but the poem is also available. You can see it online anywhere. And the Thrill of the Chase has that poem, and he wanted to make sure that people don't think that he's just doing this as a promotion just to sell more books, so he's giving away all his profits. Now, I want you to address a question in less than 60 seconds, and you can take 6 seconds if that's what you want, but I just know that some skeptical listeners are already listening to this and saying, come on, really? Come on, you want me to believe that some guy's is going to take a couple $1 million worth of treasure and really just put it out there and just give up his wealth like that? Come on, I don't believe this. Or he doesn't have such a treasure. It's just all a fantasy. So I know it's an annoying question because I do find it quite credible, but address quickly those skeptics.
Well, ordinarily, I wouldn't even bother addressing them.
I just walk away. That's right.
Well, ordinarily, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't have much patience for people who think like that. I mean, if you did any investigation whatsoever into Forrest's life, you would know. And by the way, you should do some investigation into Forrest's life before you start looking for this, because I think where he hid the treasure has a lot to do with who Forrest is. And how he wrote the poem has a lot to do with his sense of humor. But I basically, if someone wants to talk, insists that we talk about this, like you are right now.
Sorry. I'm not doing it for myself.
Then I say, think about Forrest and Forrest's family. There's nothing closer to Forrest than his family. And the last thing in the world he'd want to do would be to leave a legacy that said he was a liar and a cheat. So, number one, it just doesn't fit with his character. Number two is Forrest has plenty of money. I mean, leaving a fortune of $1 million or $2 or $3 million in old things that he's collected over his lifetime in a box and hiding it. Boy, that's just the perfect Forrest Fenn story. And for him to hide a small part of his fortune like that is no different than me taking out $100 and hiding it somewhere. Right. I mean, he has plenty of money. So if you look at it like a detective story, he had the means, and
he had the motive.
He had the will.
Yeah, he had the motive too. So one of the things when we originally were talking and communicating, Dale, you were somewhat reluctant. You're like, "Are you sure you really want me to come on your podcast? You're like an adventure dude, and like this is." And here, let me explain to my listeners why this is such a great story and why I love it so much. When I was traveling in Africa, for example, I was trying to climb all the 54 African peaks. I managed to do 50 of the 54 African peaks, but Africans would constantly look at me like, "Why are you going up there? What is there? Are you seeking, are you hunting? Are you trapping animals? Are you looking for treasure?" And I was like, "No, I'm just going up to the top of the mountain because I enjoy being in the mountains." And this was such a foreign concept for most Africans. They just couldn't, there's no reason to certainly go up the mountain, especially if it's a tough mountain, just for the thrill of it, just for the enjoying being in nature. And so and then I've walked across America 4 times. I walked across Spain a couple times, but always just because I like being in nature. So finally, here you have given me, not you, but I guess Forrest Fenn has given me a purpose to not just go enjoy nature, but actually to go treasure hunting in the process and maybe make some money. There was one little quick tale I'll tell you when I was in the Continental Divide Trail. So I was walking from Mexico to Canada and back along the Rocky Mountains. And along the way, it was somewhere in Wyoming, I think it was in the Wind River Range. I just ran across a $1 bill, just a relatively crisp $1 bill lying there on the trail. And then I filmed it as I was picking him up, and I said to the camera, "See, it pays to hike."
Yeah. Potentially, I mean, this is a treasure hunt. There is definitely a treasure at the end, so it makes it worth your while if you can figure out the puzzle of the poem and you can solve this and you can find Forrest's treasure.
Right. And here's the other thing is that what I also love about this adventure so much and this treasure hunt so much is that it kind of reminds me a little bit about Kilimanjaro in the sense that Kilimanjaro is a very tough mountain to climb, but it's also what some people call the everyman's peak or the everyman's challenge. It's like everyman's Everest, if you will, because an 80-year-old can go up Mount Everest. It is possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. Almost anybody can do this, but it's a really tough challenge. Same thing with El Camino de Santiago de Compostela. It's in Spain. It's a long journey. It's about 800 kilometers, 600 miles or so, and it's tough. But maybe not 90, but anyway, certainly an 80-year-old could do it. The El Camino de Santiago. So it's it's accessible to children. It's accessible to old people. And this trail, because one thing you did not mention, but Forrest Fenn, when he hid the treasure, he was nearly or around 80 years old. And so he emphasized people, don't go anywhere an 80-year-old man carrying 20 pounds of stuff on him could not go. It is not in a really hard to get to place, physically hard to get to place. And, don't expect to ford across a river up to your chest. Don't expect to go on a vertical surface. And people have died I think 5 people have died already looking for it. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's 42 pounds, by the way.
Right. But he did 2 trips.
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So therefore, I figured that his first trip, I think he took just the stuff and then he took the chest, or vice versa.
Yeah. First, he has said that first he took the chest and then second brought the goods up.
Right. And the chest itself is a relic from the 11th century or 10th century.
Yeah, they think it was a bronze box. Well, we know it's a bronze box, and he thinks it was used to hold a book of days or a Bible.
Okay. So maybe tell us a little bit about the funniest and most absurd solutions to Forrest's treasure. Did you ever heard? Give me an example.
Well, I think one that Forrest told us himself was one day he got a phone call from one of his neighbors, and the neighbor inquired why there was somebody in his front yard digging up his front yard, and when he asked him about it, he told him that he was looking for Forrest's treasure. And
and that's funny because Forrest explicitly said it's 12 miles north of Santa Fe.
Yeah, 8.2 miles is the number. Actually, he said it was 66,000 links. He was talking about surveying, and he said he was talking about chains and links, and he said it's the treasure itself is 66,000 links, and we had to do a little bit of math. I hate it when they throw that kind of stuff at you.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to figure out that comes out to 8.2 miles, but he didn't say that until the second or third year of the hunt. In addition to the poem, I mean, Forrest obviously is still alive. Forrest writes. Forrest has given us additional hints and additional clues about where the treasure is. He appeared on the Today Show once a month for, I don't remember, maybe 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
And he would give a clue on the Today Show, whenever he was on. And he's also written, in blogs. He's given us, and he wrote a second book, and there was a third book that was compiled by good friends of his. So there's also a friend of his by the name of Doug Preston, who is an author, who has himself given a couple of clues. Folks think Doug Preston might very well know where it's at.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even know what those clues are, but let's just give a real general clue to the audience. Basically, it is hidden somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, roughly 8 miles north of Santa Fe, all the way up to the Canadian border. So and it has to be between how many thousand feet? 5,000?
Yeah, basically 5,000. Yeah, and 10,000. 200.
Yeah, 10,200 feet. So in that zone. So it's a pretty wide area. And there's a few other things, like it has to have sagebrush around it, and has to have pine trees around there, and has to have mountains somewhere in the view. But, I mean, this is all pretty vague. So it's a pretty large area, and people have done everything they can to kind of narrow that down, obviously. But you're looking at bigger.
And the poem itself has 9 distinct clues in it.
Right.
We argue constantly over exactly what those clues are. There's more than 9 words in the poem, so people, everybody has a different not everybody has a different, but there are several different interpretations of what the clues are in the poem and how they're packaged up in the poem. But
we'll read the poem later on.
Yeah.
But because it's fun to analyze it too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing about this treasure hunt is you have to use your mind to figure it out. It isn't just a matter of having the ability to go out into the mountains and get on your feet and go look for this. It's also a matter of spending time trying to decipher that poem, figure out what it is Forrest is talking about, where he is talking about, and then after you've done that, after you've figured out the 9 clues and where they take you, then go physically out and look for the chest itself. So it's both a mind game and a physical adventure. And a lot of people who look for it don't have the ability to go on their own. There are a lot of senior citizens who no longer can participate in outdoor adventures anymore, but they apply their mind to this and try to figure it out, and then they get one of their nephews or grandchildren excited about it and send them out with the directions on how to find it.
It is a great thing, and thank God for Google Earth, because those who are, let's say, in a wheelchair, they can actually explore much of the planet, or certainly the Rocky Mountains, with Google Earth, and that helps a lot to narrow down certain things as well, not to mention the internet in general, to figure out how the terrain looks, etc. It's super useful. Now, I had a question for you, Dale, about, most treasure hunters hold things tight to the vest. When they in the old pirate days and you knew where the treasure was, you're going to not share that information at all, any information. And yet you're kind of like the opposite. You have a website and you've done numerous interviews. Why are you an information giver as opposed to an information taker?
Well, I just thought from the very beginning that it would be a good idea to try and share, that we could sort of crowdsource the idea about where this treasure is, that one person alone possibly couldn't figure this out. But the more minds you have working on what these 9 clues are and where they take you, the better chance we would have of finding it. And I mean, I'm not such a damn miserly person that I figure if I don't mind sharing, a few $1 million, if I were to be lucky enough to find it, and I would do that with someone if I were to find it, and we crowdsourced where it could be. So that's what the idea behind the blog was. First of all, it was to give people information about Forrest. Forrest, I believe, is a relatively complicated person, and he has a sense of humor. And I thought that if that could be revealed to folks, it would give them a better idea, and give all of us a better idea about what he meant when he wrote the poem and what he was talking about. So that's why the website came up.
To give people an idea of the scale of how hard it is to find this simple treasure, even though we have clues in a poem, that nearly 500,000 people have searched in vain for this treasure. Now, do you think it's going to be found in this century, this decade, or maybe this year or next?
No, I think it could be found tomorrow. I mean, if it wasn't for this darn COVID-19 or whatever it is we have. Yeah, I do. I think it could be found easily within the next few hours, or it could take well past Forrest's lifetime. It could be there for 100 years. I mean, there'd be no point in looking if it was, for me at any rate, if it was pointless to find it. If it was impossible to find. And I don't believe it is impossible. I just believe it's hard. It's difficult. And most of us can't quite get into Forrest's head. We can't quite figure out precisely what it is he's talking about. You already mentioned that it's in, I believe you mentioned that it's in one of 4 states, New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, or Wyoming. And that's a big area, especially, I mean, you would know better than anybody. I think you've walked that area. Right. It's a huge piece of geography. You can begin eliminating some of the possibilities, but I'll tell you, there isn't much of Montana that's below 5,000 feet. So, you're hard put to rule out great stretches of Montana or great stretches of Wyoming. So, this is going to take, and before you get out there and start walking around, you've got to come up with a plan. We call it a solution to his poem. Right. You've got to have some idea where you're going to look and why this makes sense for Forrest and to come up with this idea.
Right. And you kind of need, I think, 3 qualities to find a treasure. One of the 3 at least, or more. One is you have to have intelligence. Number 2, you have to have persistence. And number 3, you have to have luck. One or more of those things. I guess you could be dumb and you could not be that persistent. You could just be damn lucky. And that's one way to find the treasure. I mean, maybe a kid will stumble upon it who's just exploring in the woods. Now, given all the people who have searched, it is in some ways remarkable that nobody's found it. And yeah, it's kind of maddening that all these people have searched and not one person has stumbled upon it, although a few people apparently have come within a couple 100 feet of it, according to Forrest Fenn. So what do you think is the percentage chance, Dale, that somebody who finds a treasure does not announce it in some fashion? So many people have already suggested, okay, the forest does exist. I'm not a skeptic, but somebody has already found it. And right now, Forrest Fenn himself has said, no, nobody has found it, but he will die someday. And someday soon, I think he's 88 years old. I mean, he doesn't probably have another 10 years. I hope he lives another 20 years, but chances
he'll
are
be 90
slim.
This year.
90. Okay, thank you. So, his time is limited, and I'm just wondering, like, after he dies and somebody finds it, how would we know somebody find it? So all those idiots are still looking for it and nobody's announced it. What do you think is that percent chance of that happening?
Well, I think it's not very good. Sure, it could happen. But remember here, you're dealing with a guy who wrote a poem with directions to a treasure that nobody has been able to find yet for after 10 years of searching. And you said 500,000 people, and I think that's a very low figure. My goodness. I can tell you why I think that's a low figure later. But you're dealing with a guy who's pretty smart. Forrest is not some country bumpkin who fell off a wagon somewhere and decided to write a poem and hide an envelope in a tree. This thing is hidden pretty well, and the poem is one heck of a great puzzle. I think that it's certainly possible that someone could find it and not tell anybody, but Forrest has said he believes that he took precautions against that happening, and I believe it. Remember, he's not a dummy. He's a smart guy. He wants the world to know that it's been found. So folks will stop looking, say, spending money on gas and restaurants while they're out looking for a week, and go do something else that might be more fun and more rewarding.
Right. And by the way, Forrest did say that one of the main reasons he just did this whole adventure hunt is to get people out of behind their computers and get outside and explore nature. And that's exactly what I think the whole point of it. And so I think a lot of people who say, I looked for the treasure, I didn't find it, but I had a great time. I had a great time in nature. And to me, that's, the treasure, if you find it, that's a bonus. But the whole point of this whole exercise is to get outside, do some hiking, do some camping, pull out your pad, sleep outside under the stars, and enjoy the adventure. And if you find the treasure, great, but you probably won't find it, but at least you'll walk away with the treasure of having a great experience.
Yeah, and I'm the poster child for that. I've been out there looking probably about 80 times now, over 9 years. And I obviously have never found it, but I enjoy the search. I enjoy the adventure every time I go. I mean, it's something new to me. I usually end up visiting some new place or take a new twist or turn to a place that I've visited several times in the past. I enjoy, I've tasted Frito pie. I've slept underneath the stars. I woke up smelling sage in the morning. Build a fire, make some coffee. I enjoy myself. I really have a good time, and I've experienced all kinds of new places in this country of ours. And Forrest is directly to blame for that.
That's great. I imagine, Forrest Fenn once said, the person who finally solves this treasure hunt is going to walk there with a certain amount of resolve and certainty. And he's going to walk with purpose, and he's going to know exactly what he's doing or she's doing. But many times, I think, at the same time, people do stumble onto treasures all the time in history, or dead bodies by accident. Just people stumble onto random stuff. Now, what do you think is the percentage chance of maybe somebody stumbling upon it just by accident?
Well, Forrest has actually ruled out the word stumble. He said nobody's going to stumble on this. So, what does that mean? Well, what does stumble mean? If you want to look up in a dictionary, I think you'll see that it has something to do with walking. So maybe no one is going to accidentally run into it on the ground and stumble on it and trip on it. Maybe it's hidden in such a way that you can't stumble on it because it's not on the ground. Maybe it's hidden off the ground a little somewhere. I mean, you get into word chases like that when you start playing with the poem and trying to figure out the possibilities for what Forrest has said and tying it all together to come up with a solution. It's a lot of fun.
Right. And he has said that he has not indicated whether or not it's buried. So it may be buried, it may not be burired. So That's another thing to think about.
Although he did say
buried,
at one time...
it's tough.
Yeah, at one point somebody asked him whether or not a metal detector would help, and he said his answer to that was, "Well, if you're close enough." Pardon?
Oh, I thought he said if you're on top of it, it'll work.
Oh, yeah, well, he said if you're close enough, I suppose a metal detector would work. I mean, after all, it is bronze, so. Right. Yeah, I mean, It would be foolish to say no, it wouldn't work, but he didn't make it sound like it was a good idea to go looking like you needed it. He also said at one point that if you're within, I think he said 15 feet of it, I don't know how anybody could be within 15 feet of it and not see it.
Right. That's maddening. It's so maddening. It sounds so tantalizing. I'm like, come on. Especially since some poor bastards have been within a couple 100 feet of it.
Yeah. And people have, since Forrest has a legacy of he was a fishing guide in Yellowstone. He spent most of his youth, summers in his youth in Yellowstone. His dad was a teacher. And so, they would spend all summer long up in the Yellowstone area. And Forrest at 14 was a fishing guide up there. He couldn't even drive a car. Couldn't even drive his clients out to where they were going to fish. But he was a fishing guide up there, and many of the stories in his book circulate around Yellowstone and the Yellowstone area in Gallatin County, and so a lot of people think that might be the area where it is.
Right. What about when Forrest talked about having that resolve and knowing where the hell you're going and this is it? I imagine that a lot of times, Dale, you probably at times, you're from Washington State and you studied everything and you're like, okay, I've already done this. I've already searched 50 times. This time I'm very confident I'm going to the right place. And you get there and obviously you didn't find it. So what was it? Where did you think you went wrong? Or were you never that confident ever in in all the solutions that you came up with?
The first search I ever went on was the most confident I ever was. This was very early. This was very early. And I believed at that time that it was in New Mexico for all the obvious reasons. I mean, Forrest lives there. He said he hit it in an afternoon. And, where could he go from his house in an afternoon? Well, he's not going to go up to northern Montana in an afternoon. And I believe that. Since then, I've come to realize the finesse of Forrest's language, and I understand that what I originally thought is preposterous. But at that time, I believed, okay, it's going to be in New Mexico somewhere. So I began looking on Google Earth, as you pointed out, trying to tie the clues together. Okay, where would warm water halt? Where would there be a home of brown? On and on and on. So I came up with a place. And I mean, it was obviously perfect. It fit all the clues. I knew I was right. I just needed to get out there and go get it. Well, for me, from up in northern Washington down to Santa Fe takes 24 hours of driving because I refuse to drive on a freeway. So it takes me 24 hours of nonstop driving to get down.
You got to tell us. You got to tell us why you refuse to take a freeway. That's a very interesting statement.
I don't like freeways because I can't see anything except gas stations along the side of it. It's no fun. I can't just decide to pull over.
Right. It's like somebody who said about the interstate in the United States. He says, now with the interstate highway, you can go from one end of America to the other end of America without seeing a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I believe it. So I like taking the old dirt roads, the old side roads. I'll take the blue highways any day, on the maps. I just find that part of the fun experience is get out there and see America, see what we're made of, and visit folks and go to mom and pop restaurants and eat homemade pie. I love that. God, there's nothing like a good road trip to have a small adventure with. But anyway, I digress. So I was sure it was in New Mexico, and I decided to head out there. And for 24 hours of driving, my mind is consumed with what I'm going to do if I find. At that time, we believed it was worth about $1 million. So I'm consumed with what could I possibly do with $1 million? I mean, I'm thinking. I have a van that I drive. My van's name is Esmeralda. Okay. And so I'm thinking about replacing Esmeralda, but I don't want to think about that too loud because, after all, I'm in Esmeralda, and the last thing I want her to do is start giving me trouble just because,
She's jealous.
That's right, So I think a little bit about that, and I think about what else I could do, and with $1 million and how it could, really change a person's life. And I mean, I'm just excited as hell. I think I'm going to go down. It's like I'm walking into the bank with a mask and a gun, and I'm going to walk out with $1 million. I mean, I'm very excited about this. Wow. And I knew I was right, and I knew I was right up until the moment when I got out of Esmeralda and started walking around in my perceived place, and I realized that this was stupid. That this is absolutely the worst. This isn't going to be it, and then my world fell apart. But that was when I was most excited. After that, I've always been very contained about it. It was kind of a letdown not to find it at that time. Excuse me.
Now given, you're no dummy. Dale, you've been searching. Obviously you're dumb a little bit because you haven't found it. But you're no dummy in the sense that, you're probably, I think, one of the people that got within 200 feet of the treasure, because Forrest Fenn said that at least, I don't know, is it a couple of people have been within 200 feet? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he said that. And he also said once that folks have been within 500 feet of it.
Right. Many people have been within 500 feet, and a couple of people, or a small group, has been within 200 feet of it. And I'm just wondering, maybe, does it torture you at night to think that maybe I was one of those 200 people, one of those people who got within 200 feet?
I wouldn't say it tortures me, but I've thought about it and I've considered it. The timing would have been right for me. I was involved in the chase. I was communicating with Forrest. It's possible that I was one of the 200-footers. But, when you really begin thinking about that, so what? By that time, I had been back and forth, crisscrossed all 4 states. I had probably had 7,000 or 8,000 miles on Esmeralda while I was looking. I had probably another 60 or 70 miles in walking over, during that period of time. So he says someone has been within 200 feet of it. And by the way, he didn't say that they necessarily, all of them walked. So I'm thinking to myself, well, hell, I could have driven by it, or I could have, how do I begin to formulate where I could have gone that close to it? I've looked in a lot of great places by that time. The only information it would give me if I knew I was one of the 200-footers is not to explore any place new.
Right. Well, that's big, though. That's huge, because I imagine when you're searching, oftentimes when you feel like you've covered a place sufficiently, you kind of cross it off your list and say, I'm never going back there again. Just like that first solution that you came with in New Mexico, your very first thing, you're like, this is completely wrong. This makes no sense once you got there on boots on the ground. So you probably crossed it off the list and you've never been back there since. But of course, if one of those places you crossed off is one of those 200 places where you're within 200 feet, you're up shit creek. You're
that's
in a big,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's tough.
Yeah. So, but I've never been confident that I was one of the 200-footers. So I've never let it get to me. There's lots of little things like that in the chase that I think are very distracting. And I don't think Forrest does it on purpose to distract people. I just think people, when you don't find something you're looking for, you get distracted by other possibilities, crazy things. Think about all the dumb places you've looked for your keys when you couldn't find them.
Totally.
Yeah, and of course they didn't turn out to be there.
I'm sure I put it in the freezer.
Yeah, you tend to eliminate places, and all of a sudden you still haven't found them, and so you begin, looking in obscure places, and then it turns out to have been in that first place you looked, or it, fell out of your pocket and it's in the couch. Right. It's always a simple answer. You just get distracted by stuff. And that's what happens in this chase too. People get distracted by, well, who cares if you've been within 200 feet of it or not? That's a distraction that somebody has been within 200 feet. The point is, come up with a good solution and go get it. Not, gee, I wonder who's been within 200 feet of it.
Right. So who do you think, or is it the type of person or maybe the group of persons who will actually find this treasure, or do you just think it's unknowable and that's just forget it? Is it there's a type of person that you can imagine, or you have no really clue?
I don't actually have a clue. Okay, so I think the person who's going to find it is me. So I guess you'd just look like me.
But do you think people like you, is there who has an advantage or a disadvantage? Look at the trade-off between somebody like you, who's a veteran at this search. You've been at it forever, not forever, but for 10 years, and versus a newbie, let's say people who are listening to this on the podcast, or myself, who I've never looked once. You come in there with a fresh mind versus somebody who might be overthinking the riddle.
Well, I think that's a good point. And if someone pays attention to the forums and the blogs a little bit before they go out there, they'll see a lot of solutions that people have tried. That's one of the unique features of our blog is that you can read and folks go out and they on a solution and they record it with video or with a camera. And they come back and they write about it, and you can read about these stories, where people have looked and why, what their solutions were. And you can see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. It's both gaining information about where people have looked and been unsuccessful, but it's another diversion. Sometimes you pick up ideas that aren't necessarily good ideas because that person did it, and in your head that seems like a good idea. And you don't know until you've been out there that it's not a good idea. So I think that there are lots of really, really smart people who can come up with interesting, diverse, and meaningful solutions to the poem. But when you get out there, they don't work with how they worked in your mind. And on the same token, I think there's lots of folks who are adventurers who spend all of their time up in the mountains anyway. I mean, they love the mountains. They love being up there with the animals and the views and the smells and the clean air. And they look forward to that. And they have lots of experience at it. And they're able to travel comfortably in the outdoors for periods of time. And so they, you'd think they may be right up there with being able to find the treasure too. But if you can't come up with a good solution, you're nowhere. You're absolutely nowhere.
Right. You have to get somewhere in the ballpark to even have a chance.
I think that's absolutely true. Not only do you have to come up with a good solution, it has to be a workable solution once you get out there. Lots of people, I think, come up with fantastical solutions. I mean, it's a fun thing to think about. Who in their mind, as a kid, didn't play pirates, didn't invent treasures, and maybe hide something from their friends and make a treasure hunt out of it, and then spend all day looking for something you hid. It's a fun thing to do. Who's a kid didn't read stories about pirates and hidden treasure? Who among us has not seen an Indiana Jones movie? I mean, treasure hunting is fun. It's part of the American psyche, and so it seems like we've all watched those movies. It seems like it's easy. You follow the directions. I've heard this equated to like baking a pie. All you have to do is look in the poem, follow the directions, and walk right to it. Wrong.
It is that simple on some level once you actually know the solution. Forrest has been doling out little by little these teeny little hints and clues along the way for the last 10 years. If he were like terminally ill, he's just sitting there on his deathbed, do you think he'll kick out one last juicy clue? He has said that he has mixed feelings about whether he wants the treasure to be found while he's alive or after he's dead. He says, he didn't take a strong position on that. Do you think he'll belt out a last juicy one before he goes, or do you think this is pretty much he's given a bunch of juicy clues up until now and that's about it?
Well, first of all, I think that's part of his marketing campaign here. Remember, his whole purpose in doing this is to get folks outdoors.
Right.
He wants to get kids away from video games. He wants to get them off the couch. He wants them outside. And he wants that because That's how he lived as a kid, and he thinks that was just the most fun he's ever had in his life. And he wants people to have that fun over and over and over again. And so that's part of why he created this whole thing. And so his marketing strategy has always been, let's see how we can get kids outdoors. Let's see how we can get them out there smelling the sunshine, he calls it. And
Right.
And I think that this, well, I don't know whether I want people to find the chest or not. I think Forrest doesn't really care one way or the other, whether it's found tomorrow or it's found 1,000 years from now. But remember, Forrest has looked for and traded in objects that were created 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. I mean, he has gone on plenty of treasure hunts in his life looking for collectible items that he could have. He wasn't necessarily interested in selling them. He just wanted to hold them. And I've seen him hold pottery that's 300 years old or even older, and he'll hold it up, and you can tell by the look in his eyes that he really admires this. And he said, do you think the person that made this ever thought about someone holding it in their hands 300 years from when it was made, and wondering who made this, and wondering how long it took them, and wondering how good a maker of these kinds of pots they were? He always is attracted to the people idea. It's more than just the object for him. And so I think that Forrest would take great pleasure, personally, in having the treasure not found for 1,000 years, so that someday when somebody does find his treasure, they'll hold up and they'll say, who did this? Who was this crazy person that did this? Why did they do that? What were they thinking? And they'll read his biography that's also enclosed in there, and they'll say, this Forrest Fenn guy, they'll be saying his name, Forrest Fenn. He'll be in the newspapers or whatever media we have at that time. People will be speaking his name again and saying, so I think that there's a little bit of a legacy involved in this for Forrest. But
sure.
So I think the idea that 1,000 years from now people are going to be saying his name interests him. But I also think that it would be bad marketing to say that, because then people wouldn't bother looking and say, oh, this guy has no intent. Nobody's going to find this thing for 1,000 years, so why should I go looking for it?
Right.
That's crazy.
Right. Absolutely.
So he's got to leave that end open. He's got to say, certainly possible to find this thing tomorrow. And he has said himself, it's difficult to find, but it's not impossible.
Obviously.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
It has to be found one day for sure. We will turn it over. By the way, I was trying to think in my limited research of this whole thing, I came to the following conclusion: 60% chance that it's in or near Yellowstone National Park, 30% chance that it's in New Mexico. And by the way, it's just northern New Mexico, north of Santa Fe. So it's not the entire state of New Mexico. And 10% chance that it's elsewhere, either Colorado or somewhere far in Montana, etc. So my question to you is, what do you think about those estimates? Or more importantly, or different question is, has there ever been a poll that tests searchers, people who are looking for this treasure, and say, where do most people think it is? Just out of curiosity.
There was some research done by a guy who teaches sociology, I think, at the University of South Dakota. Boy, I'm not going to get any of this right. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare for that question. And it was recent. I'll well, I don't know if it'll do you any good or not, but I'll send you the link to that. It's on my blog. And he did a questionnaire and had searchers come and fill it out. He came up with I don't know how accurate, his results are, but this is what this guy does for a living outside of teach this subject. And he came up with some pretty terribly interesting statistics and data about who searchers are, where they go to search, and why. And I think you might find that interesting. Maybe you'll be able to pull something out of it.
Right. No, I would love to see that. Again, it's kind of like it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it might spur you to have new ideas that maybe you didn't think about, but on the other hand, it can send you down a wild goose chase, which is completely fruitless and distract you from maybe you were thinking clearly ahead of time. It's a real mind game.
No, it is. And the searchers call those rabbit holes. And,
right.
Folks just get so focused on something that it doesn't make any difference whether it's feasible or not. It just makes a difference whether you can make it feasible in your head. And you follow those crazy ideas until you get so frustrated that you either quit and decide that everybody, including Forrest, is crazy, or a lightning bolt hits you and you realize that you're in a rabbit hole here.
Now, you've talked with Forrest either through email or face-to-face or in a variety of mediums a variety of times. And obviously, you've not gotten very good inside information from him because you haven't found the treasure yet. So,
or we could go back and rule out number one on your list, and that is I'm just not very intelligent.
Exactly. There you go. So, but the point is that one day, though, Dale, you might find the treasure. And do you ever worry about, let's say, if you're the guy who finds the treasure, that people will say, "Aha! I knew it all along. Forrest Fenn told you and gave you insider information, and you didn't share it with the rest of us." Do you ever worry about that?
I don't worry about it, but others do. Yeah, I get accused of that on a semi-regular basis, usually twice a year. So it'll come up. It'll be a big lightning bolt in somebody's head, and they'll say, "This Neitzel man, he knows Forrest. He's a friend with Forrest. He knows stuff that we don't know, and he's not given any. He's not sharing that information." And of course, I not only get crap for that, but Forrest gets crap for that too. You share stuff with Dale. How come you don't share stuff with it? In fact, the truth is, I'm very careful around Forrest. We don't talk about the treasure chest. If I did that, I couldn't be Forrest's friend. I mean, if I was just another searcher out there bantering him about giving me some clues and giving me some hints, I'd just be like all the other thousands of people who send him email or knock on his door or break into his yard. Trying to get him to give them some information. And I decided the very first time I talked with Forrest that I was not going to be that way. There were plenty of other things I was curious about Forrest, and I would spend my time on those things. And anyway, I think those things are important. I think that they will eventually help us all find the chest. The more we discover about Forrest, the more we know about how he thinks, the more we know about how he puts together a puzzle and a poem, the more likely we are to be able to crack this thing.
You said yourself that the most confident you ever were when you were treasure finding was the first time. And ever since then, it's been downhill. So my question to you is, I imagine, now Forrest said, when people go out and look for it, the person who finds it will go with purpose, resolve, and know exactly what he or she is doing. And you've kind of indicated that you almost never feel that way anymore, or at least not that certain anymore. So I imagine if you actually stumble upon it and you don't stumble upon it, but whatever, you find it, what would you do? What would you do if you found the treasure? Not just the moment there, but thereafter. Would you sell it? Would you, announce it immediately? Would you wait? I think Forrest said that people should wait a month before they tell anybody. What would you do?
Well, I've often considered that because it is a common discussion on the blogs and forums is, how would you handle this? And so I thought about it a little bit. And for me, it's really pretty simple. If I were to find the chest, the first thing I would do is pass out. After I woke up, I would then take the chest and throw it in Esmeralda. And Esmeralda, throw a blanket over it, and Esmeralda and I would drive quickly but safely down to Santa Fe. I would, announce to Forrest that I was coming and that I had the treasure chest.
Hold on. When you drive down quickly to Santa Fe, would you actually take a freeway then?
I might in that case. I might. and I would, I would want Forrest to go. I would want to go over every item that's in that chest with Forrest. I'd want to know the provenance on all of the items. Where did this come from? Where did you get it? What is it? Why did you decide to put it in the chest? That's what I would care. And beyond that, what I would do with those items, I have no idea. But I would take some guidance from Forrest. Now, this is all assuming that Forrest, of course, is still alive when I find it.
Right.
But, I
What if he's not?
I haven't gone in that direction because, I'm going to find this thing tomorrow, and Forrest is still around. So.
What about so the key, what most people think is the first clue of the poem is when it says, begin where warm waters halt. Now, that Forrest has indicated is the most important clue of the entire poem because that narrows, wherever you start, is kind of narrows down dramatically your search area because it's not that far, apparently, from where the warm waters halt. So in that sense, it is the most, and he's also said, Forrest has said that the clues get progressively easier and easier as you go through the clues. So clearly, the first clue, if that is where the warm waters halt, is the hardest clue to solve. Now, you've probably heard every single hypothesis in the book of what that could mean, where that could be. Is there anyone that sounds plausible to you, ones that you gravitate to, or you just really been all over the map?
Oh, sure. One of the early ones that I thought was really good until Forrest gave us further information that it was not the possibility. Remember, he has told us, we know for sure that this line in the poem, begin it where warm waters halt, which is in the first line of the second stanza of the poem. This is the fifth line of the poem, and Forrest has told us that is the first clue.
Okay, great.
So begin it where warm waters halt. What does that mean?
And he also said that it's not a dam.
Right, and that's what I was going to talk about. I always thought, I agreed with that dam theory.
When you say that dam theory, you mean that terrible theory or that dam?
No, I mean that dam. It turned out to be a dam theory in both senses, but in the beginning it was the theory about dams. And so the theory about dams is that the outtake to a dam is usually low on a dam. And if anybody who's ever gone swimming in a lake knows that the water on the surface is warmer than the water down below because the warm water sits on top and is heated by the sun. And the warmest water is right at the top. And the further down you go, the colder it gets. So at the outtake of a dam, which is relatively low on the dam, the water is the coldest. And the dam itself is stopping the warm water. So I always thought this was a pretty good theory. Until I began thinking about this. Why would Forrest want to hide his treasure around a dam? And then one day, Forrest said, you have to remember, this is the place Forrest wanted to end his life.
Right.
And
he still wants to be buried there, right? Doesn't he want his either ashes or bones to be buried there, ideally?
No, he's claimed he'll never get back there. And I don't know whether he'll want his ashes or bones put there. But logically, it doesn't make any sense because to do that would be giving away the place. And since the treasure is hidden there.
No. I mean that after the treasure finder finds it and therefore announces to the world where that secret place is.
I suppose that could be. I haven't heard that.
Okay. Really? Okay. Wow. I thought that he would want like a small little gravestone in that spot. I thought that's where he wanted to be buried ultimately after the treasure is found.
I don't know that. And let's just say it's hidden in Yellowstone National Park. I think he and his family, no matter how much money they have, would have a hard time getting anybody to let them bury him there.
Right, but they could get his ashes spread there, I believe.
Yeah, but they're not going to put up a monument.
No, of course not. No, but he could have his ashes spread there. I mean, in other words, you should ask him that next time you talk to him and just say, hey, do you want your ashes to be spread wherever it is? Because you can spread ashes anywhere, I think.
But once again, I think that's a distraction. How's that going to help me find the chest?
Oh, true. No. It's more out of just curiosity for him and just where he would like to have his ashes remains.
But anyway, I fell for that damn theory. And there were a lot of people who fell for it. And Forrest finally announced, as you pointed out, that the poem "Begin It Where Warm Waters Halt" has nothing to do with a dam. What I think now, I've written in the blog about my most reoccurring location for where to begin is number one is up in Yellowstone National Park. There's a place there where, as you know, hot springs pour into creeks and streams in Yellowstone. There's a lot of hot water. There's probably very few places on Earth where there is such a concentration of thermal events.
Right.
And there's just a tremendous amount of hot water that comes up to the surface out there in Yellowstone.
I think there's only two places on Earth that are exposed supervolcanoes, and that's Kamchatka and Yellowstone.
Yeah, okay. Well, I hope it's not in Kamchatka because I haven't looked there.
That's Russia for those who don't know.
A good possibility is that there's a geographical place where two rivers, very warm rivers, come together in Yellowstone, and they form a brand new river. So it's where the Gibbon and the Firehole River meet. And this place is called Madison Junction. Mm-hmm. And it is the beginning of the Madison River. It's where the Madison River starts. So I think that, remember that line again, begin it where warm waters halt. That's plural, waters. So we're not talking about a thing that stops. We're talking about maybe more than one thing. So two rivers stopping in one place, and two warm rivers absolutely halting. They stop. They end right there. And they're warm rivers. So warm that fish can't generally stay in them in the summer. And a brand new river starts, the Madison. So begin it, the Madison River, where warm waters, the Gibbon and the Firehole, halt. To me, that just makes a lot of sense.
Now, many people think, I think that is the most popular solution for where the warm waters halt because everybody talks about Madison Junction. Am I right?
I don't know. No, I would say that is not the most popular, but
really?
I think it's
Okay.
It's up there. Yeah.
Okay.
Another popular, and let me tell you why. One of the things Forrest has said is
he spent a lot of time there. A lot of the trappers that he admires from the 19th century, like dicked around in the Madison River, and so it's
Absolutely.
a very historic place.
Absolutely, it's also yes, it's a very important place to Forrest. It's a very important place in history, and it fits. It fits really well.
At the same time, it's been the most combed over place on. Probably one of the most combed over places around, and every little stone has been turned. It seems that way. Like if there's any place in the whole Rocky Mountains that people have really scoured to death, it's around Madison Junction. That's my assessment. But again, you're suggesting that no, not really, not the most popular place of all.
No, I don't think it is at all.
Okay.
But you're right in that there's a number of people that go there, and that's because when you start coming up with ideas and solutions, this one seems to fit pretty well.
It does. I agree with you.
But Forrest has also, in some ways, ruled it out.
Have you read Journal of a Trapper, the book that he mentions?
Oh, yeah.
In his... Okay.
Oh God, I have an entire library of books here that I've been reading for 9 years.
How about Flywater?
Oh yes, I have both copies of Flywater.
Okay, so I mentioned these two because those are two books that he mentions in his book, The Thrill of the Chase. And especially I'm most interested in Flywater because he describes that Flywater, it's kind of a coffee table picture book, a lot of beautiful photos of Wyoming and nice fishing spots, that he kind of refers to his secret watering hole, his secret place that he likes to fish in. And he talks about how some of the greatest places that he used to fish in as a child are now kind of quote unquote overrun by all sorts of people. But it kind of made me think that, there's a good chance that maybe his favorite spot is not pictured necessarily in that Flywater book, but maybe off of, nearby, or just a junction off of it or something like that. It's within a couple of miles of his secret hiding spot. So have you, when you've looked through those books, do you think it's worthwhile flipping through it? Obviously it hasn't helped you solve it up until this point, but maybe there is some clues there.
I read them for background information. I don't look at them for clues. There's too many references to too many books. Forrest has known too many people. When I'm looking for clues, I look directly in the book, and not in the outside external books.
You're talking about the thrill of the chase.
Yeah. Well, and
Too Far to Walk.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
for those who don't know, Too Far to Walk is his book that he followed. He's written several books, but Too Far to Walk came up afterwards. I didn't realize that. I thought he said there are no clues in Too Far to Walk, or maybe I misunderstood.
No, actually, he said when somebody asked him if there were any clues, he dodged the question. He said, the map is in Too Far to Walk, so yes, there's a clue. Or he didn't say a clue. Yes, there's clues. So we don't know whether or not there are other clues beside the map, but, both books, Forrest, how can you write about your life and not provide, if not a clue, some hints?
Right.
Forrest is very clear that there are hints and there are clues. The clues will take you to the place where the treasure is. The hints will help you figure out the clues. They won't take you to the treasure, but they'll help you figure out the clues.
Or at least narrow down the clues, narrow down the possibilities.
And so, to me, it seems like it's more important at this point, if you haven't come up with a solution, to look for the hints than it is to look for the clues. It's more important to come up with the hints about what's a hint and what isn't. And we're talking about books with, 60,000 words in them. 2 of them. I mean, geez, if you're crazy enough, you can come up with a hint in every line in the book. You've got to be able to think again like Forrest and like the author of those books, and imagine what the hints are. Are the hints broad, like you've pointed out? I mean, he spent much of his life as a child enjoying the area around Yellowstone National Park. So does that mean that Yellowstone National Park is a potential hint because he talks so much about it in his book, or because he has mentioned such and such a restaurant, or working as a paper boy, or pumping gas at such and such a place? Is that the hint? Is the hint very specific? And people go back and forth about this all the time. If you want to, you can find thousands of hints in those 2 books.
Sure.
Yeah, it just depends upon how you determine what a hint is. Let me go back. I finally figured out what it was I was trying to say. So the first line, begin it where warm waters halt. Forrest has said there are many places in this country where warm waters halt, and most of them are north of Santa Fe. That pretty much rules out Madison Junction, because as far as I know, that's the only place where 2 rivers end and a brand new one starts. I don't believe there are many places in this country where that happens. Mm-hmm. So you get into things like that. Another very popular place to begin. So, take that little piece of information. There are many places where warm waters halt, and most of them are north of Santa Fe. Well, what could that be? Well, it could be a hot spring.
Obviously.
There are thousands and thousands of hot springs,
right,
in the West, and most of them are north of Santa Fe. Could it be a hot spring? Well, okay, so let's say it is a hot spring. Which hot spring? If there are thousands and thousands of them, which one do I begin at? I can't just choose one and start there. How do I eliminate 999,000 hot springs and choose one to start at? Is there information in the book which would help me with that? Well, it turns out that there isn't any real information in the first book, but in the second book there is a little bit of information about what hot spring he may be talking about.
Oh, really?
And if it was a hot spring, on the other hand, you could say, well, he talks so much about Yellowstone. I believe that this hot spring is in or around Yellowstone. What's the most famous hot spring in Yellowstone? Old Faithful.
Old Faithful, yeah, sure.
So a lot of people think that maybe the place to begin is Old Faithful.
Right.
Other people have other ideas. But in his second book, and also on his website, you don't have to buy a book to get this story. You could just look on his website. He wrote a story about Ojo Caliente, which is a hot spring in Yellowstone.
New Mexico. Oh, I thought.
Yeah,
no,
you're right. It is also there is a hot spring called Ojo Caliente in New Mexico, and I've gone down that rabbit hole before. But he's talked about Ojo Caliente in Yellowstone, and he used to ride his bike about 13 or 14 miles, I think it is, from West Yellowstone, where his family eventually built cabins and ran a small little cabin place called Fennhaven there. But they didn't have any plumbing in their cabins in the 1930s and 40s. So to get a hot bath, Forrest had to do one of two things. He either had to take a bath in a big hot pan in front of his whole family, and he didn't particularly care for that, or he could get on his bike and ride into Yellowstone National Park, where he would go to Ojo Caliente. And right there in the Firehole River, where Ojo Caliente drains into the Firehole, he could go between the warm water and the cold water and find a really good place to sit there and take a bath. And he said it never took soap in there, but, you rinse off and you'd feel good and wash your hair, and then bicycle ride home again, 14 miles to get back to West Yellowstone. So he's talked about this. So that's a possibility. And I've always thought that was a good possibility, too.
Yeah, it sounds quite reasonable.
But we don't know anything for sure. And he's also told us that the shortcoming of all of this, looking in the books for clues, for hints to the clues, is that he has also said that everything you need to find the chest is in the poem.
Yeah.
Everything you need is in the poem. Well, so if it's Ojo Caliente, where in the poem does it point me to that?
It doesn't.
Where? Yeah. Well, it might. It might. What's your interpretation for the first stanza of the poem? I believe you had an idea for, as I have gone alone in there and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where and hint of riches new and old. Do you remember what you were thinking about that? Yeah.
My interpretation is I went alone to my hiding place, making very little effort to hide my treasures since nobody was around. That's why he says, with my treasures bold. So it's obviously not a very touristic place. It's not right next to Old Faithful or something like that, because he couldn't walk with a bunch of treasure in his hand. So it's got to be someplace secluded. And then he says, and a hint of riches new and old. I figured that it's got to be a place that has some sort of historical significance, maybe an old trade route, a mining operation that was nearby, or something like that. But that's my first stanza of the poem right there. But as you said, the first clue is actually in the second stanza, which is begin it where warm waters halt. And as far as that's concerned, I have no idea. There's a million possibilities for that first clue.
And remember, the first clue isn't until the second stanza.
Right.
He's also told us that the clues in the poem are in consecutive order. They're in the order. First clue is first in the poem. The second clue is second. Third clue is third in the poem. Okay, so they're not jumbled up. We know that they come to us in the order that we need to follow them.
Right.
So, given that, there's a whole stanza in the beginning that doesn't have a clue in it.
Right.
All 9 clues have to be after the first stanza. So what's the purpose of that first stanza? If it doesn't have any clues in it, why did he write it? What's it about? Well, here's my theory is most people think that the first stanza is giving a little bit of background about the place where he hid the treasure. It's just setting, giving. It's like, the introduction to a book. It just gives us a little perspective about what the book's going to be about.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, but then you're saying it may not be.
It may not be. For instance,
it may be something more.
Yeah. So, if I need to know which hot spring he's talking about, it would be logical that he would be describing it in the first stanza. Mm-hmm. He describes the first stanza, and then he tells us to begin there. He describes the place to begin in the first stanza, and then he tells us to begin there. So, where has Forrest gone alone? One of the places he's gone alone is to take a bath. Mm-hmm. As I have gone alone in there, let's think about Ojo Caliente for a second, this spring where he used to go to take a bath. And with my treasures bold, he may be talking about being naked.
Right.
I can keep my secret where, and hint of riches new and old. Those first 2 lines could very well be describing his bathing experience when he was a kid.
Right. It could also, there was also that time described in his book when he goes with his brother, I believe, up in the mountains, and they got lost for a couple of days. And that's another place where he, you could say that he went alone. Well, I mean, he didn't go completely alone. So your solution about him bathing alone is closer to, I think, is a better solution than going up in.
That was with Donnie. Brother. That was one of his Lewis and Clark adventures. They were young guys, and they got some horses, and they decided to go up Red Creek Canyon, or Red Canyon, I guess, and they got lost up there. And it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story about 2 kids having an adventure.
Right.
And it makes you want to get out in the mountains and go have your own adventure, and that's the whole purpose.
And it could be that in that journey, maybe he found his secret spot there, and maybe he said, wow, this is the coolest place on earth, and this is great. And then over the years, he would go back there occasionally to just check it out, and he said, wow, there's still nobody here. It's still not that discovered. Yeah. And so it has some sort of historical significance with him. But continue, you were saying that, okay, so the first paragraph, stanza, should I say, is potentially setting yourself up as maybe that Ojo Caliente place as where he bathed once, and that could be setting the stage for saying, okay, now that you're there, begin it there.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. But in order to fall into that idea, you have to know something about Forrest. For one thing, who would he write that first stanza about being naked and talk about, his privates?
He might, yeah.
Yeah, he would if he had a sense of humor.
Yeah, and he certainly does. He's got a mischievousness to him.
Absolutely he does. And I think it's important to remember those things as you go through the poem and look at it with a third eye. Don't take everything as obvious. Even though it's not supposed to be terribly difficult. He's told us before that, you don't need to apply codes to the poem.
Right. There's no cryptography and all sorts of random stuff. It's fairly literal. It's not so obscure.
It's a tempting way to look at the poem, but it's not going to get you anywhere with it. And so I don't have to be a code breaker in order to figure this poem out. It's straightforward, he said.
Right. So almost a child could solve it effectively.
Absolutely, and that's what he wants. It's just another way to interpret it. And I think that's what you have to do as you go through the poem. It's straightforward, but you have to be inside Forrest's head when you're reading it. And I'm not believe me, I'm far from saying that the first stanza is absolutely about Forrest taking a bath at Ojo Caliente. I'm just saying it's another kind of an interpretation, and it's an example of what you may have to do, how you have to look at the poem in order to interpret it, the way Forrest wrote it. And that's what we're doing here. We're not after Dale's interpretation. We're after Forrest's interpretation. We're all trying to think like Forrest as we read the poem. And so the more you know about Forrest, the better off you're going to be.
The poem takes about 60 seconds to read, so I'll go ahead and just read it for those who've never heard it before. We've already read the first stanza, so I'll start with the first clue, which is begin it where the warm waters halt and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put in below the home of Brown. From there, it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There'll be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. If you've been wise and found the blaze, look quickly down, your quest to cease, but tarry scant with marvel gaze. Just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trove for all to seek? The answers I already know. I've done it tired, and now I'm weak. So hear me all and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold.
Very nice. I think I know where it is now.
Because clearly this is the second time you've read it.
It's a wonderful riddle. It's a wonderful poem. Forrest said it took him 15 years to write that poem. And so how can anybody expect to read the poem and know the answer in 10 or 15 minutes or wake up in the morning and have it solved? I mean, a guy who spends 15 years writing, I don't remember how many, 155 words or something like that. How do you not think that every single one of those words is important? The interpretation of what each and every one of those words is not important. And that you can't just look at it like a nursery rhyme and think you're going to crack it. You're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to look up words. You're going to have to read the book. You're going to have to use your smarts to figure out what Forrest meant.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I kind of wrote a summary, kind of like a checklist, and I'm sure you probably have one too, where these are things that you must be true, that we kind of like, these are the few things we know besides the poem itself. Obviously, where the warm waters halt is the key thing that's the hardest thing to know. He did say that pine trees and sagebrush must be nearby. So if you're searching in an area that does not have pine trees and sagebrush, it can't be there. He did say it's between 5,000 and 10,200 feet, 5,000 to 10,200 feet. I thought, remember when he was on, I saw the video of him when he was announcing it on the Today Show. He said the forest, the treasure is above 5,000 feet. Did you hear that?
Yeah, it's been talked about widely on the blogs and the forums.
Right, and so some people think, okay, well, he almost said 7,000. He stumbled, and maybe that means that it really is. But the poem does says that you're cold. If you've braved the cold, if you've endured the cold, that could be because of a high altitude. He gives the impression that there must be a nice view. I also figured that higher places must be have less foot traffic than places of low altitude. So that's why I was just thinking if you're going to err to one side of the altitude scale, it's probably on the high side of the altitude, closer to 10,000 than it is to 5,000. But again, I'm just speculating. That's not for sure by any means. What do you? He's given
us some additional information about that. For instance, he has said it's not on a mountaintop.
Yeah, that's right. He said it could be near the mountaintop.
That's right. He did say that. Right. And we also know that he intended this whole search to be for families. He wanted kids out there. And we know it's not in a dangerous place. I mean, he said it's
not on like Yellowstone Canyon. Is that right?
he didn't rule out that happened. He said over and over again, and you said this in the beginning. Remember, an 80-year-old guy hid this, and what does that mean exactly? Well, I don't. Forrest was a fit person at 80, but he didn't go rappelling down a cliff,
right?
And he didn't get in a whitewater situation in a raft. He did something that you can do with your family. He drove to a certain place. He got out of his vehicle. He walked with 21 pounds and to his hiding place and hid it. He walked back to his car, got another 21 pounds, walked back to the same place, hid it in the same place, and walked back to his car again. And he did all this in an afternoon. That doesn't mean that he took all afternoon to do it. It could mean that it took him 2 hours in an afternoon. It could mean that it took him 25 minutes in an afternoon. Or it could mean that it took him all afternoon. But you have to be very, very cautious about how you interpret words that he has given us.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true, and it's easy to get carried away.
We know it's in a safe place. We know it's not in a dangerous place, and people who think that they need to be Indiana Jones to go out looking for this thing, rappel down the side of a cliff, get into a whitewater raft, they're fooling themselves, and they're likely to put themselves in danger that you certainly don't have to be in to go find this treasure. This is for families. This is for children. This is meant to be a lot of fun. It's not meant to be a physical test.
He did say that the bronze treasure chest is wet. He says, I know it's wet. And somebody asked him, well, why do you know it's wet? He said, physics tells me it's wet.
Right. But remember, and I think you alluded to this, remember the time of year that he said that.
Yeah, he may have said it. I don't remember when he said it, but I alluded to it. You're right. I
believe it was in January.
Okay, right. So it could be covered in snow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sorry, it could be dew in the morning.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. He has also ruled out, he has said it's not in water.
Right.
So, and if you think about that, it makes sense. I mean, he isn't going to plunk it down in the Madison River or the fire hole somewhere because... to
wash away. That's right.
Those currents would... I mean, have you seen the size boulders those currents have? Particularly if he wants it to be there for, 1,000 years, and he has said as much. So if it's going to be there for 1,000 years, he certainly didn't plunk it down in a river somewhere. Right. But at any rate, we know it's not in water. Could be near water. We like to think it is near water because Forrest was so fond of fishing. Lots of people think that one of the lines, home of brown, in the poem refers to the home of brown trout. Right. It's a possibility. Other people think it could mean a brown beaver. Other people think it's something completely different. There's a ranger. There was a ranger at Yellowstone called Brown, and his cabin there is still called Brown's Cabin. And a lot of people think that has something to do with the treasure and the home of Brown.
Right, which I don't think so because he says you can't really skip any clues.
Right, number one. And number two, he's also inferred, and I believe that this is true, that that none of the clues are man-made.
Right. Right, that's right.
They're all geographic places, we believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and he said it doesn't take. Somebody asked him at one point. I can't remember what they asked. It might have been history. They said, "Is a great deal of historic knowledge going to help me find the chest?" And Forrest said, "No, but a comprehensive knowledge of geography might help."
Right. Right. Understanding the terrain and everything like that.
Yeah. And Forrest has written a number of emails. That's a wonderful thing about looking for a treasure, that the guy who hid it is still alive.
Sure.
He communicates with us, and he does that via email. He does that via videotaped interviews. And there's a wealth of information that has been collected over 9 years of Forrest in interviews and in writing letters to people. that we have collected. Most of it's on the blog, and you can there are basically two blogs that he communicates with. One is Jenny's, and the other one is mine.
Can you say the names of both sites, please?
Jenny's site is Mysterious Writings, and
.com.
mine is The Thrill of the Chase. And on Jenny's site, Forrest answers specific questions from searchers. They'll write in questions, and Forrest answers them on her blog.
Another good blog, by the way, is terryscant.com.
That's useful for looking up quotes. If you want to know exactly what Forrest said, and by God, it's easy to not know exactly what Forrest said. There's so many wrong quotes floating around on the web. Forrest, and if you want to know whether or not Forrest actually said that, Terry Scant has. I'm not sure how current they are, but at least for the first 7 years, they have all of his quotes categorized. But there are new blogs and websites that pop up, I would say a few a year, and a lot of them try to condense that information and make sure it's true and do it in an honest way. A lot of them don't care. You go to some place like Reddit to find out, you get information, and Christ, you're going to be running around in circles. They've got all kinds of trash. I mean, that's where rumors in the universe began, was Reddit, I think.
Absolutely. What about the legal implications, which sometimes gets talked about a bunch? Because, he's collected, I guess he knows a lot about this because he's found all sorts of artifacts, I believe. And these artifacts, when they're found, the owner of the land, whether it be the U.S. government or whether it be private property, could lay claim to those artifacts that he has found himself in his treasure hunting. So I guess he's had a lot of experience. But regardless, it has an implication for whoever finds the actual treasure, because whether it's found in a national park, BLM land, or any kind of Indian land, or it could be on private property, there's a huge implications because the owner of that land could say, hey, no, wait, that treasure you just found, that treasure chest, we actually own it because you found it on our property. Which, by the way, for those who kind of bristle at that, if somebody just goes into your backyard and finds a big treasure, you might say, well, wait a second, you found that in my backyard. Who gave you entrance to my backyard, and et cetera? So what's your quick summary about this whole issue?
It's a rabbit hole, and it's a distraction. Who cares? If you haven't found the chest, just have fun looking for it. And if you have found the chest, that's the time to worry about whether or not, it's yours. And in almost every case, even if it's on private property, if you've found it and you haven't destroyed anybody's private property looking for it, there are legal avenues to get the chest back in your hands again. It's just foolish. Don't waste your brain cells on that problem. Waste your brain cells on where the chest is.
Right, but there is one argument to say, okay, if you can, then let's say eliminate certain possibilities. Like some people say you should go to Yellowstone National Park because if you want to pick one spot on the planet that's probably not going to change much for the next 1,000 years, at least the ownership of it, it's probably Yellowstone National Park. In 1,000 years, it'll probably still be a national park unless it blows, a super volcano blows. But and then conversely, other people say, no, if Forrest has private land, actually owns land that is under a different corporation's name or something else that we just can't look it up, and he puts it on his own property, well, then that would be also another no-brainer, because then he would avoid all that conflict. Or, for example, it can't be on Indian land, not because it can't be there, but because it would just create such a legal worm of headache. So one reason to look at this whole question is simply to eliminate possibilities. So there's that utility of doing that mental exercise.
You can't possibly eliminate anything. Forrest has refused to eliminate it for 10 years. How can you eliminate it? I mean, just because it might be illegal for you to find the chest or for Forrest to hide the chest in Yellowstone National Park or Mesa Verde or any other place, just because it's illegal doesn't mean he didn't do it. Forrest is crafty. I mean, and as you pointed out, where better to preserve the place where it's hidden for the next 1,000 years, or at least for the foreseeable future, than in a national park where they're not going to be putting up a subdivision or putting in, very many new roads, particularly out in the wilderness. So there are, like you said, there's arguments for and against, but you can't answer the question. You don't know what's in Forrest's head. He's refused to rule out any particular land formation. Could be on private land, could be on Indian land, could be in a national park, could be in a national forest, could be in a wilderness area, could be on a golf course. I mean, we have no idea. I think you're foolish at this point to rule out anything.
Got it. No, but I do think that also those are good words of wisdom. I came to the conclusion that it's got to be within a mile of a parking lot, just because if it's much more than a mile, you're carrying 20 pounds. Walking an old man who's 80 years old can't really do something in an afternoon. So it has to be a mile or less from a parking lot. Do you think that's reasonable, or do you think that's also too much assumptions?
No, I think that's pretty reasonable. Certainly I met Forrest when he was 81, and he was in good shape, and he could certainly have carried 20 pounds, a few miles. But, we're not talking about a 20-mile trek here. And again, you have to put it in perspective of the family. Is a family going to... an average American family who just got off the couch after playing video games going to get up there and walk 20 miles? No friggin' way. He didn't intend for it to be that kind of a physical test.
I also think that something noteworthy has to be within 200 to 500 feet. In other words, it has to be either a parking lot, a monument, or a trail, or something, because there's no way for him to know. Let's say it's a wide open, crazy field, like just a wide open or huge mountain with nothing discernible that you can point to and say, that spot. Because for him to know that some people have been within 200 feet, he has to know where they've been. So there's got to be something noteworthy within 200 feet, which is, of course, a very general statement, but it is, something that we have to think about, right?
Well, maybe, but I think you're inferring that all these people were walking when they went by it.
Right, but it has to be if they were driving by it. It still has to be a noteworthy. I guess you could say, I see what you mean. You could just say I was on Highway 35.
That's right.
And therefore, and then where were you going from? I was driving from Cody, Wyoming, all the way to West Yellowstone.
Okay. I took 191 up north.
Right.
He could remember. Forrest knows that people have been close to it because folks have written him and told him where they were and where they went, or they write him and tell him where they're at today and where they're headed. So that's how he knows that people have been close to it. Not because he has some secret hidden camera close to the treasure chest, but because folks have written him and said, this is where we looked, Forrest. He gets, I don't remember, I think he gets something like 200 to 300 emails a day, most of them from searchers looking, fishing for additional hints, which he doesn't hand out. But, they tell him where they've been looking, or they send him pictures of where they were. Mm-hmm. And so he knows that certain people have been by it. Those people himself, he never told them that they were close to it. He's claimed he's never done that. But he has told us that some people have been close.
Right.
And so, and he's crafty about the words he uses. So if he, and in some cases he has used people have walked right by it. But in other cases, he left out the word walked, and it could very well be that they drove by it.
Yeah. Oh, God, what a maddening but thrilling adventure it is. It is such an amazing story. So where are you going to be going this summer when the COVID-19 corona apocalypse ends?
Well, back up into, I'm concentrating in the Gallatin County, Montana area. Okay. That's where his family had cabins and cottages up near West Yellowstone, Montana, and I believe that I've been looking there for 7 years. I just believe that's the right area. I refine my search each time I go up. I've been looking more than 80 times. I would say 90% of those searches have been in that area. I don't.
Have you wasted any time in Colorado?
I did. I can't even remember where I looked once. In two places out there, mostly on the Green River. There's a place up there called Browns Canyon. I've looked around in there a little bit, and up in Dinosaur National Park. But that was early on, and I don't believe either of those places have anything to do with Forrest's, with a place Forrest would love. It's easy to look at the middle of the poem. Begin at where warm waters halt is a difficult first clue.
Yes.
And what is that? I don't even know what that means, let alone what the heck, try to identify a place on the map. But you take something like a line that says, put in below the home of Brown. Home of Brown is something I can find on a map. I can find brown canyons, brown maps, brown creeks. I can find various things that refer to brown in our universe and apply that to a map. And so a lot of people make the mistake, I think it's a mistake, of starting there. Okay, let's look for a home of brown and then go from there. And they just ignore the first few clues. They just start right out in the middle, and then they claim they've figured it out.
And it's so funny. There are people who actually written books saying, I have found the treasure. I know exactly where the spot, and somebody got there before me. And they cannot conceive that perhaps they're wrong.
I know. That drives me crazy that people do that. Well, they're absolutely sure that they've come up with the right solution. They went out and looked. In some cases, yeah. But in some cases, most of these ideas that these people have for first souls have been many, we're talking about, you said 500,000. I think that's low. I think there have been millions of people out looking. But, people, it's like Reddit sometimes, if I don't find the treasure, I think I'll screw with the next person who comes here.
Right.
and we've had reports of people finding nice little, the treasure chest, by the way, is 8 by 8 by 5 inches. So we've had reports of people finding, when they got to the location, the chest wasn't there. But guess what? There was an 8 by 8, 5-inch hole, perfectly dug out recently. And so someone dug up the treasure chest. And, but what's interesting about this, I get probably 2 or 3 reports that somebody has found it spring, summer, and fall months every year. And folks writing me. And what's interesting about this is that, so what is that? A couple hundred people over 9 years, and no 2 of those spots have ever been the same.
Right.
So the treasure has not been found. Forrest has told us that he will tell us. Of course, assuming that he's still alive. I don't think he's figured out a way to tell us if he's not. But, he's going to be 90 this year. But Forrest has told us that when it's found, he'll let us know. And the reason to let us know is because he doesn't want anybody out there spending money and looking for the treasure chest when it isn't findable anymore.
Yeah, no, that's one of my big concerns. That's why I really would like somebody to find it while he's still alive. And he's 90 years old now. We really got to find it ideally in the next couple of years. I would love to go this summer. I probably won't be able to because I'm still working on my Africa book. But I've put it in my calendar. If nobody has found it by 2021, I'll go out there and be another ridiculous searcher out there who thinks, no, this time it will be different.
But you say ridiculous, but it is fun. It is a lot of fun, and it is an adventure. And what is, particularly if you're not from the mountain area, and you want to have a nice, interesting, fun family vacation. You sit down at the picnic table in the winter, or when this coronavirus is going on. You sit down at the kitchen table with your kids, and you try to figure out where the treasure chest is, and you come up with a solution. And then when the weather gets good and coronavirus is over, take a family vacation and go out and look for it. What could be more fun than looking for a hidden treasure while you're out exploring the mountains? I mean,
That's what motivates me, and that's why I want to talk to you so badly, because like I said from the very beginning of this podcast, I've been hiking so much in the mountains. I'm kind of like, I read Forrest's book and I thought to myself, God, we are kindred spirits. We just love the outdoors and just exploring. Although I'm not a fisherman, I think it would be useful if I were, because I would understand him maybe a bit better. But anyway, now I could combine my passion for being outdoors. And by the way, as a bonus, you might actually get some treasure. I mean, it's 1 in a million shot, but hey, in the worst case, you'll have gotten a nice fresh air, and it's a great adventure to do it. So I wish you the best of luck to find it in the Gallatin forest or somewhere out there. Yeah, it's gonna be. I can't wait for somebody to find it.
There's always treasures to be found when you're out there walking around. I mean, people find Indian arrowheads, people see buffalo, or people see moose, and people see elk. People see bald eagles. People have small adventures. If you're a fisher person, going out there and bringing your fly rod along, assuming you purchased a license. All of this is just great fun, and there are lots of little treasures. If you don't find the big treasure, I can't think of a trip I went on when I didn't come back with some kind of a little treasure that I have on a shelf over here. When I look at it, it reminds me of that particular trip. It's fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't wait. I really want to go on this adventure, and I don't know where I would start, although I agree with you in your logic that it's probably up in Wyoming. It's got to be a place that's sentimental. There's a video of you, I think you're searching with a woman, and both of you are out there, and she's a longtime searcher as well. And you guys both concluded it's got to be a place that's emotional for Forrest Fenn.
Yeah,
That's
Cynthia. Cynthia has a blog too, and I'm not going to remember the name of it. Maybe you can mention it. But
I don't remember it myself, but I can put it in the show notes if I want.
Yeah. And Cynthia has a wonderful blog too, and she's been looking for nearly as long as I have. She's wonderful. In fact, I'm not going to say that. Never mind.
Oh, she knows where it is? Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm the one who knows where it is. Don't you read the blogs?
You're about to blurt it out. And Cynthia are going to go pick it up next weekend when we... Oh, I better not say that.
Yeah. Cynthia has a great time. She searches by herself generally, except a few times when she searched with a partner. But she generally searches by herself. She also she wrote the book on where to search in New Mexico. If you're looking for ideas about where to go looking in New Mexico that were unsuccessful for Cynthia, but might not be so unsuccessful for you, Cynthia wrote a book about all the places she searched in New Mexico. But now she searches up in Montana and Wyoming.
Where does she live?
She lives in
what state?
New Mexico.
Oh, maybe that's why she started in New Mexico.
Yeah, she's a longtime hiker, so she's been she's hiked New Mexico, and she fell for the concept, like many of us have, that Forrest must have hidden it close to where he lives, because otherwise, right. How could he have done it in an afternoon? Well, you just need to explore that afternoon idea a little bit, and you'll see what he's talking about.
Well, I thought I had read somewhere that he had gone and his wife didn't know he was gone, and he came back. And so I thought I heard that story, but again, that's probably a misquote, because obviously
no. Here I can square that away. So when Forrest was building the treasure, so he got the box and he started putting stuff in it, and he rearranged this for many years. We have pictures of the chest, but not in its final form. But we have picture of the chest opened up with things in it, but. The picture was taken before the final arrangement of stuff. Forrest would put things in, and later on he would take it out and put something else in, so he kept doing this for years. But he would take this box out, and he would show it to people who came over and visited him. That's how another reason why we know that the chest existed or exists. Many of his friends saw this chest. Lots of folks saw this chest. I'm good friends with Forrest's nephew, Creighton Fenn, and Creighton goes to visit Forrest every Christmas, and more than once. Forrest would say, "Go to my vault." Forrest has a walk-in vault in his house, and go to my vault and get the chest and bring it out here. And Creighton would do that, weighed 42 pounds, and carry it out to the kitchen table where Forrest would go over. Look at this! I decided to put this in, and so we know that chest exists. We know that Forrest was having fun with it, that he was enjoying putting it together. And he would, in the last couple of years before he hit it, he would put it in his vault. And a lot of times his vault's open, and certainly his family can go in and out of his vault. And so he would have the chest in his vault, but he would put a red bandana over it just because, to hide it. Nobody ever thought anything like that, he's keeping dust off of it or whatever. And when he decided to hide the chest, he put a pile of books that were about the same size as the chest on the shelf where the chest was, and put the red bandana over it.
I didn't know.
So nobody knew exactly when he hid the chest. But Forrest would, some people say, well, it must be close by. He couldn't have just left the house, and gone to hide this chest for 6 days. But absolutely Forrest could. Forrest was not a person who stuck around home. He was always an explorer and an adventurer and a trader. He went to places to purchase paintings to sell in his gallery. He went to places to trade stuff for his own collection. He went out exploring, looking for things on his own.
There was an annual conference that he went to in Cody, Wyoming, correct?
Well, he was on the board of the museum there at Cody, the Museum of the West. Is that what it's called? I can't remember. We refer to it as the Cody Museum, and he was on the board there. So he went to board meetings annually. So yes, he would head up to Cody, and sometimes Peggy went with him, and sometimes not. But even all by himself, Forrest would just decide to go up to Wyoming and a place that he heard about, and search for points or relics or anything, he didn't stay at home except when he had to. And the most he was ever at home was when he was working when he owned that gallery. Before and after that, he was on the move constantly. His family was used to that. Forrest would just go away and do things. He'd be gone for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. He had an airplane. He would fly to Cody or rent a car. Sometimes he would fly, sometimes he would drive.
Right.
There's all kinds of ways that he could have hidden that chest.
When you search, Dale, do you spend a month or the entire summer? What's your schedule like when you typically?
No, for me, I was working right up until last July. And so, like everybody, I got an annual vacation, and I would take my vacation and go, because for me, the search area is quite far from where I live. So I couldn't just go for an afternoon and search. I had to make a trip out of it. So for me, I would go once a year, maybe for a week or part of my vacation, sometimes all of it, and go and search. And the rest of the time, of course, after I failed, I would come back and try to figure out what I did wrong.
Right.
And then plan for the next year. But now that I'm retired, I can spend as much time as I want doing that, assuming that I still have money left to do it with. It does take money.
Yeah,
it does take a little bit of money. You've got to drive there. You got to pay gas. You've got to eat in a restaurant or cook all your own meals. If you're not going to camp, you need to get a motel room or something. So, it takes money. I do it very cheaply. I stay in my van. I travel in my van. I stay in my van.
What are the rules for sleeping in a van? Or you can't sleep in a van in a national park, or can you? I guess.
Oh, yes, you can. Well, you can't just pull off on the side of the road and sleep. Just like on a California beach, you can't do that. But no, you can camp in a van. If you make a reservation in a campground in a national park, they don't care whether you have a tent or an RV or a van or your car.
No, but there's no place to camp for free in your car.
not in a national park.
Right. Okay, so you have
But
to be outside.
you can in national forests.
Okay.
In a national forest, you just can pull off the side of the road and camp any place you want. Decide this is it.
Right.
And you can do that in many other places too. Like there are many places like you mentioned before, little pull-offs where you can enjoy the view. And in most states, at any rate, there isn't a sign at that pull-off that says no overnight staying. So you can park there, sleep overnight, and get up and go searching.
Yeah, or do what I like to do. I like to just camp outside, so I'll just put my backpack, I'll leave the car parked and go off on a walk.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you can. But then the problem with that is that you can sometimes get really deep, and which is fine for the adventure, but it's not practical if you're actually looking for the treasure to get 5 or 10 miles off of a trailhead. Then you're probably too far deep to do that.
And if you're not on a trail, you can get lost that way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, sure. But I love getting lost. So last question. So what if somebody finds it in your lifetime, and how that news makes you feel? Would you feel a huge sense of relief, or you'd be like, damn it, I should have checked there more because I was right there before?
Well, I'm sure that's what's going to happen. I'm going to, when it's revealed where the treasure chest was and what the clues were and what they all meant singly, one by one, none of this, we're not going to know any of this until the treasure chest is found, because Forrest isn't going to tell us. So until it's found, we won't know what the correct solution is. And so I'm going to go, God, why didn't I think of that? What the hell?
Or no, you probably did think of that.
Yeah.
So
but I didn't look up, or I didn't.
Right. Or you walked right by it. You're one of the 200.
Yeah.
200 footers.
Yeah. So that's going to be my first reaction. Absolutely. But I'm not going to be bitter. I'm not going to be, I'm just going to go on to the next thing in my life, and I'm probably going to continue. And, lots of people have said, if I find the chest, I'm going to rehide that chest because this is a fun game.
Right. No, absolutely.
So lots of people think, okay, there's, say, a couple of $1 million worth of stuff in here. Maybe I'll take something out and then rehide the chest. Oh, what fun. Continue the saga.
Yeah,
Let it go
sure.
on and on.
Totally.
It'll always be known as Forrest Fenn's chest.
All right, Dale. Thank you so much for all your time. This has definitely lived up to all my high expectations. This has been one of my favorite conversations I've had. I'm so excited about this chest and the whole thrill of the chase. It's going to be a fun adventure. And I really hope that you've inspired lots of people as well to get out there, go look, go hike. It's a great thing. Once again, to end it on, remind everybody how they can follow you and your journey and your website, which is packed with information.
Yeah, thank you. It is. And by the way, we're doing. There seems to be an awful lot of people involved in the hunt for the chest. We've got something like 1,000 unique viewers every hour on the blog.
Wow.
So, and those folks are, not all of them are in the USA. A lot are in Canada. Some are in Mexico. Australia has a big contingent of folks who are looking. Germany is another place where people come from to look for the chest. So It's a worldwide phenomenon. I call it America's best treasure hunt.
So that's NEITZEL.com. And I will go ahead and put the links to that on the website. Thank you again, Dale. I really wish you the best. If anybody, you're one of those people who've really put a lot of effort to help spread the information out there.
Well, thank you very much. And get out there and have fun. And I know you will be. Let me know where you go.
Okay, I will, definitely. I'm like with you. I think Wyoming is the logical area, but unfortunately that's quite a big state.
Yeah, darn it. Why didn't he hide it in Rhode Island?
Exactly. Right, or it could be, or actually in Montana too, around, and somewhere in or around Yellowstone is where my thinking is taking me. But what the hell do I know? I haven't even looked once.
You probably know as much as everybody else who's been looking.
Exactly.
And that's what's fun about it, is it doesn't make any difference whether you've been looking for 9 years or you just started today. You have as good a chance of finding it as anybody.
Welcome back, Dale. you have some big news for us.
Well, it was certainly big for the searcher community. Yesterday morning, Forrest sent everyone out an email letting us know that the treasure chest had been found, and he wasn't going to say who. He said it was. He referred to the person as a guy who lived in the East, and so I mean that was huge. He didn't give us any more information, and of course, folks have been out looking for this treasure for years and years, and my guess from the load on my blog after he made that announcement, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who were interested in knowing where it was found and what the solution was. But so far, Forrest hasn't released that information.
Which is completely understandable and expected, I would say.
Not really. Forrest has said that there are photographs. And, he's got a dedicated following of followers. And right now, the only thing they want to know is, how close were they? How close was their solution to being the right solution? Did they walk right by it? Or, were they 1,000 miles from it? And that's really not asking very much. Unless, of course, the answer to this problem is the reason that Forrest won't release this information is because it was on some sort of land where taking the chest was inappropriate, possibly even illegal.
And we talked about that originally a couple of weeks ago when we originally recorded this podcast. Now, today we're recording this on June 8th, and my understanding is that Forrest said he would be sharing some more information in the next day or two. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what he said. So far, he's pretty clammed up about everything. So, although he is releasing more information to the press than he is to the searchers directly via the blogs.
So how do you feel, Dale? I mean, it must be, I would thought one word, at least for me, was bittersweet.
No, I'm actually, there's a disappointment, of course, in the fact that I wasn't the lucky guy that found it, or the smart guy that found it. And I wasn't smart enough to figure out the puzzle of the poem. So there's disappointment in that, but there's a tremendous amount of relief. I have to tell you, boy, I'm going to be very relieved not to be a professional blogger after 10 years of this. Yesterday was an immense heavy load on the blog. I mean, our server went down 5 or 6 times. We were talking about, 250, 300, 400, 500. The number kept growing of connections at one time. And the very moment one would drop off, another one took its place. We were talking about over 6,000 views on the blog per hour.
I tried to see it yesterday and I couldn't get through. Eventually I got through after about an hour of trying.
Yeah, so it was pretty hard to provide, new information as we got it. And it was pretty hard to keep up with all the requests for information. And it was difficult to even know what was going on. And there are things I've always insisted on the blog, and that is, you keep your temper in your pocket. And we know that there are lots of kids out there who are looking for the chest, and so we don't want people using language or telling stories that would upset anybody. And so, I've always tried to manage the blog that way, but yesterday, boy, there were a lot of really unhappy people, and there was a lot of language that was flying around on the blog that was really inappropriate, and trying to police that, for me was practically impossible because I couldn't get on the blog any easier than anybody else.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm trying to, and like I said, I thought of it as bittersweet. Sweet, that is, I'm happy it's over and somebody found it. I don't have to think about this anymore. And of course, I've thought about it far less than any other searcher. I didn't even search for it once. I just found out about the treasure a couple of months ago. But bitter in the sense that it's kind of upsetting. What I don't understand is why are people flinging? What's the source, or what is the the alleged reason of why people are so angry? Is it what's the common theme of the anger? Where is it directed to? What's it about?
Well, there's a couple of places it comes from. One is, we talked about this before, but some people believe that it's a hoax, and that the fact that Forrest isn't releasing any information about where it was found just seems to support their belief that this whole thing was just a big hoax.
Right,
I mean, if it was a hoax, it's pretty easy to say, okay, it's been found, done, bye. And that really upsets people. And it makes people who never thought that it was a hoax, it makes them suspicious. So that's where some of the anger comes from. Right. The anger also comes from, I think this is very, very misplaced. Some people think that their solution was the source of where it was found. Now, understand, nobody knows where it was found yet. Yet, some people on the blog are very upset about the fact that they communicated their solution to Forrest in an email, and they feel that Forrest's email was hacked, that the person who found it used their solution to find the chest. Now, I mean, I could understand that feeling if, we all knew where it was found and your solution was the perfect solution. Right. But how can you jump to that conclusion? I mean,
oh, God.
How can it's a mystery to me. But yes, there's a lot of people who are upset about that.
God. Really, it's just amazing. It's just human psychology. It's so funny. Oh, God. Okay, so now that let's just spill the beans here at this point, Dale. Now that it's been found, we can all share our deepest, darkest, not darkest, but I guess our solutions that we hadn't shared publicly, that we had kept tight to the vest up until now. And the reason I wanted to go through this quick exercise was simply so that you can say, or anybody can say, I told you so. That's where it was. And I felt that it's either you would feel really good in the sense that, okay, I was smart, or really bad because, damn it, why didn't I go there and find it? And if I was so confident about that area, or that, so here's my question to you, Dale, at least for you personally, where were you planning to go this season, 2020? Because I think you were planning to go out there. And where were you going to look? What was your top 2-3 hot spots where you thought it was going to be? And where do you think maybe 1 or 2 places that you went to and you thought, I know you told me the place that you were most confident in was a place that was your very first place, and then you realized it was kind of not right. But is there any place in retrospect that you think I think it would have been there? So basically, name me your top 3-4 places that you think it's at. And then that way you can say, I told you so.
Yeah. And I will too. I'm going to call you up. Actually, I don't have 3 or 4. I mean, I only have one, actually, that I've been working on for the past 3 years, and my mind hasn't changed much. It's broadened out a little from a specific place where it wasn't to, you keep widening out, hoping that, you were off by, maybe half a mile or a quarter of a mile or maybe even a whole mile. But the general area that I believe it's in is along the Madison River, between, let's say Cable Car Run, which is a fishing spot on Lake Madison in the park, and Hebgen Lake. So that's probably 8-9 miles of water. Now, I don't believe it's in the water at all. I believe it was up on dry land, and I don't believe it was buried. I believe it was hidden, but probably only hidden by the fact that it was in tall grass or under some trees. I don't think that it was under a rock or buried or anything like that. So, and that's as close as I can come. And I keep exploring that area, and I have been for the past 3 or 4 years.
What place would surprise you the most? If let's say, if it had been found in Colorado, would you be shocked?
No, but I'd be incredibly surprised to find out it was anywhere in New Mexico. I just don't believe. I spent the first 2 or 3 years I was looking in New Mexico, and New Mexico is a wonderful state. But honestly, and maybe it's because it's so close to Texas, but there's so many people that have tramped up the wilderness areas out there. I mean, it was hard for me to find really pristine areas out there. Practically every place was trampled down and beat up by folks because of the heavy amount of use, and I just couldn't see it being in that kind of a location. I mean, there are some beautiful places there, but they're protected areas, and I never thought Forrest put it in a protected area like an Indian reservation or a pueblo or on private land like Philmont Scout Ranch or any of those kinds of places that certainly are beautiful because they're maintained and the amount of traffic is closely guarded.
What's next for you? Are you going to go for another treasure hunt?
No, I'm headed out. Yes, actually, not for another treasure hunt so much, but I'm certainly going to go back and if there's one thing that I've learned in the 10 years of playing with this hidden treasure of forests is that these mountains are beautiful. The Rocky Mountains are a gorgeous place, and I really have learned by searching for Forrest's treasure that it's a great deal of fun just to walk around in them, just to appreciate the beauty, just to fall asleep, underneath a tall pine, just to wake up smelling sage, just to hear the sound in the evening of a gurgling stream. I mean, I really, 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 really like that, and I don't plan on stopping that at all. And so, I'm planning to head out as soon as I can, and I'm. As soon as I can put this blog to rest, I'm planning to get out in the mountains and just smell the sunshine.
I actually will confess to you, I promised myself if I found the treasure, I would give you a nugget. Just because of all the stuff you've done for the community or something like that. It's just like, and I was also planning to give back, I think it was a bracelet that he really liked.
That's right. Yeah. That was one of the things that he mentioned he put in the chest. And he always kind of said that if anybody found the chest, he would like to have that bracelet back, that he regretted putting it in there. Yeah. And he offered, it was part of the, I always felt, I don't know if everybody did, but I always felt it was part of the way that he would sort of guarantee that the person who found the chest would let him know that they found it. It was part of that, nobody's just going to take the chest and run, kind of a tactic.
Dale, I have a hypothesis, and tell me if you think you agree or not. I think we will not find out most of the details about this until 2021, just because we won't find the identity of the person, all the whole background, the whole story. We might find out where the location of the treasure is in the next couple of days, but as far as the whole 9 yards, that may be much longer in the making because of all the legal issues that we talked about.
I hope you're wrong. I hope that, I'll tell you, it's very sad for the searchers if they can't find this. I mean, for a lot of searchers, this has been, practically a full-time job. And they invested, I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about time. They invested an awful lot of it into this thing. And I'm pretty sure that this would be incredibly discouraging and it would upset many folks, and Forrest would lose an awful lot of friends that he gained on the search if this is not revealed within an expedient amount of time.
When you say this, are you talking about just the location? I was talking about the whole thing, like the identity of the searcher, how he found it, what he did, how long he had been searching for, his whole background and story.
That would be fun, and I don't know whether that will ever come out. If it turns out that Forrest hid this chest, say in a national park, and this guy doesn't want to ever admit that he's the guy that found it and carted it away without letting the Rangers know, I can see how that information would never come out. However, that's the information that the searchers need. Not about the guy. We can We can forget about that part, but we cannot forget about where the treasure was hidden and what the solution to the poem was.
I do think that will be revealed very soon, like this month in June of 2020. But I was talking more about the whole 9 yards of story about the whole searcher. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
I hope you're right. I hope it all comes out. That'll be fun, and it'll be a good story. And I would imagine that if he has that story and he's willing to tell it, somebody will buy it from him.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Exactly. And by the way, we know it's not you because you're not from the East Coast, and we know it's not your Cynthia, who is also. Did you talk to Cynthia, the other big searcher out there?
No, I did talk to. Well, I didn't talk to her. I emailed her right after I found out about this, because and she emailed me back and she said no comment. And I thought to myself, oh, my God, did Cynthia find it? I mean, she's usually pretty talkative. And I thought, no comment? That's a heck of a thing to say to your old buddy Dale, But she sent me another note later on after she probably cooled down a little bit and said, no, it wasn't me.
Yeah. Once Forrest said it was a male from the East Coast or the Eastern United States. All right, Dale. Well, we'll chat maybe one more time once we find a lot more details, ideally, but I really appreciate you giving us the update and talking about this fascinating treasure hunt that has finally ended.
Have fun, and don't forget to get out there and smell that sunshine.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.